Schaefer.
Present.
Trustee Morton.
Here.
Trustee
Here.
Student trustee Damian.
Here.
Okay, we have nothing to report out. And now we're up to approval of the agenda. We had one minor change with the auto.
We're going to pull 9.2 and do that next month. And then 9.1, we're going to move to later in the agenda because Mary Ann is going to be here after 6 o'clock. So our first action item will be 9.3.
Okay, so that's the motion.
I move that we make those changes here.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we're up to the plant report.
All right, so first off here at 5 o'clock, we're going to have engineers from GHD present the water system plan report for our drinking water system. So we have Matt Kennedy here and Trell, and I'm not going to try to pronounce Trell's name if you can do that for me, Matt.
Yeah, Mollier Mangarin.
All right.
Okay, right to the microphone, is that okay?
So the mic, certainly. Speak into the mic.
Yes. It does not amplify
it does
your
not
voice, it only is for the camera.
Perfect,
Yeah.
thank you.
So you want this.
And you have the clicker
So it's the down to go forward.
down to go forward. Perfect, thank you. All right, well, thank you, everyone. We're pleased to be here and excited to share where we are right now with the water plan report and what we hope will become a project. I'm Matt Kennedy with GHD. Trell Mollier Mangarin is back here getting our handouts together for you. And we're going to essentially give you an update on where we're at right now with the water plan report and the project as a whole. I'll start out kind of where we began with the district, which was with an RFP that you put out that was related to a letter that you'd received from the Division of Drinking Water outlining a number of deficiencies with the water system that serves the schools and Friendship Park. The letter outlined some issues with well supply and capacity, some issues with the chemical treatment building and the storage in there, and a few other items. Essentially, the state was looking to make sure that your water system is in compliance with state Division of Drinking Water requirements, and particularly because you're serving a large population of kids. So the district put out the RFP. We were selected amongst other proposers. And at that point, we moved forward with preparing a grant application to get a grant for the school district to move forward with a study. And then the grant was successful. I think it was maybe about a year it takes. The state does not move very quickly, but we were successful in obtaining the grant funds, and we moved ahead with the study. And we're going to present the draft study. We're addressing a few comments from the state right now, and we'll be finalizing it probably within 2 weeks. And our goal, again, is to have a project that the state will be behind that will make some, what we hope will be some pretty significant improvements to the water source, which is the wells that serve the school's water system, and the storage and the associated treatment system and monitoring systems. So this is a quick overview of the presentation and some photographs of your existing water system assets. We'll talk about the goals of the project, and I've kind of gone over those already initially. Background on the system and your assets. Those are basically the physical components that make up your water system. We'll talk about some of the alternatives that we've developed, what we've what we have come up with and what we believe is the best project to move forward with, and then what the next steps are. All right, and I'm going to hand it over to Trell to continue the presentation, and I'll add a few notes as we go along. Trell?
Okay, right up to the microphone when you do speak, okay?
Okay.
I've
will
been
do.
given instructions from the crew to tell everyone.
Okay, yeah, please. I mumble and I talk softly, so let me know if you can't hear me. And here are some handouts of what we're presenting today. Looks like I'm one shy, Jason.
You can share if you want.
That's okay.
I'd like to have one too.
One more. Okay, thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Just to reiterate what Matt said, the state has awarded a grant to do the planning. And one of the objectives is to evaluate alternatives, different options for your system, go over certain improvements that we can implement into your existing system that would address failing and inadequate infrastructure. And this is kind of the phase we're at right now. We're at the preliminary phase. We're going over different options, trying to find the best solution for the water system project. Following this phase, following this preliminary phase, we're going to get into the design of the project and really get into the details, which involves the planning, the CEQA documentation, which is basically your environmental impact. And then following that is the funding for the actual construction of the project. Okay, system background and assets. We're going to go over what you guys have and what your system consists of. So the water system was constructed in the 1970s, for what we gathered on record drawings. You get your water from 2 wells in the ground. System operations, you have a couple water storage tanks. You want to maintain a chlorine residual, make sure your water quality is compliant, and then that water in those tanks gets distributed to the 2 schools, Friendship Park and the community center. The system's about 50 years old. Certain assets are nearing the end of their useful service life. Some of the components of the system are non-compliant, and we'll go into detail with that. And some of the facilities are undersized.
And I'll note too that not all of the system is 50 years old. Your water main that extends between the tanks and the well site and all the way down to the high school serving the K-8 school in Friendship Park and the community center, that was all built, I don't know, 10 years ago, and that's your newest asset in very good condition. The rest of the components are reaching the end of their useful service life. And those are really the subject of the study.
Okay, here's a general overview of your system. So up towards the eastern end of the system, you have your K-8 campus, which is where all of you're familiar with your little community, you know where things are located. The 2 tanks are up in the eastern location. You have a maintenance building up there. And this is just kind of to give you a general overview of where things are located. You have a handful of fire hydrants, handful of water meters. And as Matt mentioned, you had your piping distribution, was replaced in 2008, I believe. So the main piping is relatively new. Okay, yeah, assets, this is what your system consists of. Again, you have 2 wells, that's where you get your water from. There are 2 water storage tanks. One's a steel tank, 65,000 gallons is the capacity for that steel tank, and then you also have a redwood tank, it's about 50,000 gallons. You have 1 treatment building. I don't think this laser's working. You can see your treatment building in the picture here. This is a picture of one of the wells in the bottom left-hand corner. 9 water meters and 15 fire hydrants. So some of the components of the water system that are aging or that are of concern and that we're looking at replacing are the tanks. The tanks are at the end of their useful service life. They're undersized. And then also the wells. They're not producing enough water, so we're looking at possibly adding a 3rd well for redundancy and extra source capacity. And we'll go into more detail on the location of that possible new well later in the presentation.
And I'll note too some of the comments that Trell has just made regarding the condition and the sizing of the tanks and such. The undersize of the tanks, their storage capacity is based on an NFPA, National Fire Protection code analysis that looks at the volume of water required for fire storage. Most of the volume of a water storage tank is for fire storage, and only a small percentage of it, usually in the range of 10 to 20%, is for your daily potable use, okay? So the 2 tanks together are undersized when you look at the flow and duration needed to, well, in the case of the school, it's for the largest unsprinklered building. And then, so that was the size. The condition was, the assessment of that was based on inspections that the school district had a couple of years ago of both tanks that found them to be in need of serious repair or replacement. And we'll just kind of leave it at that.
Some other components within the water system that we're looking at is putting up some security fencing around the tanks. We're also looking at updating the treatment building.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. With this preliminary study, I know this is hard to read and there's a lot of text on the screen. Something we've created for you is an asset registry. So we went over each asset within the system. We gave each asset an ID, and then we basically did some data entry with the information on each component. So this is something you can use moving forward. There are some cells within this data registry that are blank, but some useful information that's good to know about your system is, the age of the system. What's the material? What's the purpose? And so this is a tool you can use moving forward, just to keep track of assets and have an idea of what is included in your system.
Yeah, an asset registry is part of what we call an asset management plan, or in municipal engineering, they'll call a capital improvement plan. So understanding your assets, what you have, how old they are, what condition they're in, what their O&M, operation and maintenance requirements are, is the first step in really being able to understand how to plan for and budget for their future replacement, how much life you've got left in them, what kind of issues you may be experiencing. So as Trell noted, it's a tool for you to use moving forward to be able to track the condition and to be able to plan for their eventual replacement. And it's something that the state was requiring you to do as well, so.
This is just a snapshot of the asset registry. On here, we only have the site and civil access road and then also one well, but there's a handful of other components that are included in the registry. I didn't want to give you an information dump and overload you, so I just put a couple of the system components on display for this asset registry. Okay, evaluation of tank alternatives. So we looked at a handful of different tank materials.
And I'll just add a caveat. Your tanks weren't something that the state identified as an issue, but as we started the study and we reviewed the condition assessment that was done of the tank, we quickly realized that these tanks are in need of a replacement or some drastic measure to improve their long-term viability. Yeah.
Sometimes it cooperates, sometimes it doesn't. Ah. Okay, so here we have 4 different tank materials, 4 different types of tanks. This upper left-hand corner here, we have a concrete tank from, I believe it's Lincoln Park in San Francisco. Bottom left-hand corner, it's an epoxy-coated welded steel up in Samoa, which is adjacent to Eureka, if you're familiar with the area. We have another epoxy-coated bolted steel, which is similar to the welded steel, but the difference is one's bolted, one's steel. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a glass fused to steel, which is up in the Eureka area, Trinidad. And we'll go into detail of the pros and cons of each tank material. Thank you. Okay, concrete tank. There's a high initial capital cost to install the concrete tank. It costs a lot of money up front. However, it's lower maintenance relative to the other tanks. So if you're limited on resources and maybe you don't have the manpower to perform your routine maintenance and basically stay on top of this tank, this would be a good option or a good option to consider. There is potential for high repair costs. However, it's corrosion resistant, which is an ideal option in a marine environment like this. Yes?
As you go through these options, would you also give us an idea of how they hold up in an earthquake?
Sure. Yeah.
I can speak to that right now. They'll all perform perfectly well in an earthquake, in a seismic event.
There's no distinction between these alternatives in terms of their earthquake?
Their seismic performance, that's correct, yeah. Ultimately, the seismic performance comes down to the structural design of the tank and the foundation, and all of these tank types will perform acceptably well in a high seismic environment or even a moderate seismic environment, provided that their foundation and structural systems are designed correctly, and they all can be. These are all common tanks in California. So,
Well, I mean, assuming that especially, I think, I remember reading in here that the life of the concrete tank is 80 years. And as we think that far into the future, the chances of having a major earthquake in our area seems something we should plan for.
absolutely.
So you're saying that it's not the substance of the material, it's how it's installed and how the base is set and
How it's designed, that's right, yeah. And so all the tanks will perform well in a seismic event. So that really doesn't enter so much into the picture as far as the type selection. What we're focused on really is looking at the initial capital cost and the long-term operation and maintenance costs. And we're particularly sensitive to the operation and maintenance costs because those can become a burden, for some owners. And, I don't want to jump the gun here, but we really like concrete tanks in this kind of environment because they are really low maintenance. They last a really long time. They do have a higher upfront capital cost, but you get a long life out of them. And I'll let Trell kind of speak to some of those advantages, and you'll see, you saw it in the report, but you'll see, what the life of some of the other tanks are. And, really the life comes down to how well you maintain the tank, how often you're cleaning it, how often you're recoating it, things like that, yeah. And with the concrete tank, you have a lot less of that, so you can kind of leave it alone.
Right.
Yeah.
Excuse me, the current tanks, how would they hold up in the way of an earthquake? Were they also built in the way their platform is appropriate for that purpose?
Yeah, so that's partly where the concern comes in. They're not really designed for seismic environment, right? Neither of the two tanks that the school district owns and operates have foundations or are anchored. The wood tank is sitting on a concrete pad, but it's not anchored. So if there was a significant seismic event, it's possible the tank could move or shift or something worse. The same is true with the bolted steel tank. So the other tank you have is an epoxy-coated bolted steel tank. It's just constructed on a gravel pad. So it could move during an event. You could have a failure during a significant seismic event. And that's really where our concern lies, is having a failure, because oftentimes after seismic events, you can have other things occur, like a fire. What happened in San Francisco over 100 years ago, and not having an online water supply after that event, could mean the difference between, saving and not saving lives or structures. So that is one of our big concerns. The condition of the tanks is also a problem. So that's partly where, in large part where the recommendations are coming from, yeah. And to build a foundation under those tanks or design an anchorage system is not a good long-term solution, particularly if you're trying to keep a tank that's already 60 years old or older. You're better off constructing a new tank that's adequately designed for, today's building code and seismic code, and that will provide you, a long life of that asset ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've read the report, and something that's not up here is the life expectancy. A concrete tank, ballpark for life expectancy is around 80 yards, and that's 80 years, and that's a high criteria for us in our decision making. Okay, here we have an epoxy coated welded steel and an epoxy coated bolted steel, and they both their performance is comparable to one another. They have a low initial cost, so your upfront capital cost is relatively low, especially to a concrete tank. However, there's a lot of maintenance costs associated with how often these rust and how much these rust, especially in a marine environment. Here's a glass fused to steel tank. It's a little more expensive than an epoxy coated steel tank or bolted tank, but the maintenance costs are a little lower than the epoxy coated. I'd say this tank lasts 40 to 50 years. Okay, so we just went over the different types of tank materials. What are the options? What tank is going to perform best in this environment, which one is the most cost-effective based on our cost analysis. And now we're going to go into different options for your wells. So we're going to go over a few different alternatives. Your first well here, there's not a lot that needs to be done. We're going to clean it, redevelop it, get it back into an adequate condition, and the associated cost with these this cleanup is relatively low.
And I'll note too, that well is your best well. Well number one is your, I think, is it well one, right? Or,
Yes.
Yeah, these are not high producing wells. They produce at about 7 gallons per minute is what we would call the firm pumping capacity, that you could pump it continuously for 12, 24 hours and not see a significant drawdown in the groundwater level. Well number one is a great well, and it's basically carrying the system right now. It just needs to be cleaned out a little bit and maintained, and it'll continue to provide years of service.
For well number two, there's a little more cost involved with getting it back to an adequate level. We would replace the existing well. It's around $10K for the replacement of this.
And this well, it's working. It's producing a couple gallons per minute. There's some condition issues with it that from the well inspection that we did. So we did a CCTV video inspection of both the wells. And what we saw in well number two were issues that we think go back to the time that it was installed. Problems with the well casing, so the perforated pipe, and potentially also with the gravel pack around it. So this is the material between the soil and the well casing itself. So it kind of acts as a filter. So there were some pretty significant condition issues there. And also the location of the perforations and where the pump is being set, we think is leading to premature pump failure. So the district has had to replace the pump in this well more regularly than in the other well. So it's causing higher O&M. Now we think that the location, the aquifer and everything is great. It really just needs to be reconstructed in the same location, and then it would, we expect, produce a similar yield as well number one, around 7 gallons per minute. And that pumping rate is about enough to sustain your average daily water demands, okay? Your peak daily water demands, you have to have them both pumping to meet that. And any difference is made up with the storage that you maintain, right?
Okay. So as we mentioned previously, one of the main concerns from the state was the inadequate source capacity. So we're looking at installing a new well to address this concern. A new location for a well is probably going to be up by the existing wells, I think a little northeast of the K-8 campus, and we'll show you in a little more detail in the next slide where possible locations are. The objective of the third well is to provide redundancy, one more source of water, and the cost for the well is likely going to range between $90,000 and $100,000.
And the reason this is important is, and what our goal is to convince the state of this as well. I mean, this was at the heart of their letter to the school district. During drought years, the aquifer level and the aquifer capacity is reduced. And while our pumping tests showed that you have adequate capacity this year, which has been a good water year. During a drought year, that may not be the case. And having a third well gives you a water source redundancy in your system. So if you ever lost a well, or you lost a well pump, or your two other wells were not capable of producing enough water to meet your maximum demands, you still have a third well to fall back on and meet that demand. So that's where this recommendation is coming from, is giving you that redundancy in your system, the backup in case that there's a failure or a need to supply additional water. And the locations that he's talking about, we'll show you, they're kind of tucked back in the woods near the tank site, but there are some old, what we call spring boxes, but they're a little deeper than a normal spring box that is in a very wet area that we think could be a good yielding location for a third well.
Do you expect that yield to be 7 gallons per minute?
We think so, yeah. The water in this area is pretty consistent, and we think that a new well similar in size and depth as your existing 2 wells would produce roughly the same yield, about 7 gallons per minute at a firm pumping capacity. When you'll see the next exhibit, you might actually just flip forward one slide. Does that show do we get the thing on there? Okay, so this is the proposed project.
Maybe it's not
Yeah.
on there.
Well, the map, I think you've got the map on there with the wells, but we want to try to site the well a little further away from your existing wells to give some separation so that when you're pumping, you're not influencing the other wells, right? Because when a well is being pumped, it draws down the groundwater, and that drawdown of the groundwater can influence the level of the water in the adjacent wells. So by locating a well a little further away from your existing ones, we reduce or eliminate that influence, and that allows you to pump multiple wells simultaneously and increase your supply. And this is the figure I was looking at or thinking of. Where the pinpoint is on the map is roughly where your 2 existing wells are. And then in that same circle, but kind of near the top, is where these old abandoned spring boxes are located. And we think that area is a good spot for a well. It's far away, but it's also looks like a very high yielding area. The issue is really making sure that those existing spring boxes are managed or dealt with correctly. Really, they were abandoned and they haven't been used in what looks to us like decades, but they need to be properly abandoned. I think they stopped using them, but they're really still there, complete and intact, and they need to be removed and sealed up to the ground level to make sure that the aquifer is sealed and intact, and that you don't have any health risks, because if you have open water that's connected to the groundwater, that can create, potential for, bacteria or other pathogenic organisms that could make their way into the drinking water system. So those need to be adequately abandoned before a new well would be brought online. Does that answer your question?
I'm picturing the map, the net gain, so if we're going to have an additional 5 gallons per minute by making the second well fully functional, so you're saying that we need to almost double what we currently, so we're going to have 2 at 7 at that point, and you're saying that is, even with that, it's not sufficient, we need another 7.
Well, the 2 existing wells together is about enough capacity to meet your maximum demand, right?
So we're not meeting our demand right now.
Well, you are, in a large part, because you're not irrigating anymore, or not irrigating nearly as much as you were before, and that's had a big impact on the ability to meet the demand. You're also pumping continuously and keeping the tank full when there isn't a demand, right? So the demand is really during school hours or when irrigation is occurring, if you're irrigating with potable water. And you're making it up during those off-peak hours by pumping continuously. So by having two new wells, you've added the redundancy, but you've also enabled, you can reduce your pumping time. So you can pump for a shorter period of time, get yourself back up and full again, shut the pumps off, not be running them continuously, because that is going to shorten the life of a pump. You're going to be replacing them more often. And yeah, it's just a better long-term system operation.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Did you say that well 1 and 2 pull off of different aquifers?
Same aquifer.
Same aquifer?
Yeah, they're very close to each other.
Right,
though.
that's-
Yeah.
I was thinking you said it's separate, and I was confused because I don't really know how aquifers are shaped, but they seem awful close to be sucking off the same one. So
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like putting the third one in is going to actually help us during times of drought. And what it will do is provide us with a third pumping station in case one goes down.
That's right. And by locating it further away from the other two wells, it does increase your pumping capacity, because we would be able to reduce or eliminate the influence of the wells on each other.
Right, that's the influence with regards to pulling head from one or the other, but it still doesn't address the issue of an aquifer getting low during the drought. So that is not fixed by this.
That's
It's
right.
only somewhat a increase or guarantee of the rate. So is the state's concern with redundancy the issue, the reason we need this third well?
It's adequate, what they term adequate source supply. And right now, the two wells don't meet it based on your historic water usage.
Is the historic water usage, does that include the irrigation that we don't do anymore?
It does, yeah.
Okay,
And
so-
when the state looks at it, they look at the last 10 years of use.
Uh-huh.
So those are the numbers that, per the state requirements, we have to look at when determining whether your wells are able to meet demand, right?
Right.
We're aware that you're not irrigating, nearly as much. I'm not sure if it's completely cut off or if you've just cut it back significantly, but I mean, that definitely weighs in on the use. With the two wells, you can meet your peak demand, and there is that additional volume in the tanks to pick up anything extra, right? So if there was a fire, you've got, storage there, although it doesn't meet what the fire code currently considers the required minimum storage for fire, right? So the third really is there as a backup, right? If you ever lost one, you've got a backup that you can rely on to make sure your peak demand is met and your tanks.
Do you know the design of the or the shape of the aquifers underground here? Could we put one down in the southeast or southwest corner and get a different aquifer?
It's all the same aquifer, yeah. And this is a shallow aquifer. These wells are less than 50 feet deep. The groundwater is is real shallow. I mean, it's probably 5 feet down below the ground surface before you first hit water. So there's water there, but during dry periods it drops, significantly.
Okay.
So yeah,
Thank
yeah, you're welcome. Yes, sir.
You brought up the issue of the fact that we're not irrigating our playing fields. And I'm sure you're also aware that we also have in the works various grant option, proposals for a gray water system, cooperation with the Mendocino City Community Services District to take reclaimed water and pump it up, and then have that be available for field
Yes, sir.
irrigation.
Yes.
Assuming that at some point in the process of developing this, we find that we're going to be successful in getting those grants, would you then say we no longer need the third well?
You could probably get away without it. Okay. I am, as a civil engineer, we always tend to err on the side of conservatism. And my professional opinion is it would be prudent to have the backup, right? Particularly because of what the system is serving, right? Who the system is serving. Yes, with the recycled water system, that will significantly reduce your potable demand for irrigation. Yeah, and we're working with the school district on obtaining those grant funds. In fact, I think we're very close to having a contract, or the state is close to having a contract ready for the school district to move forward with a feasibility study with the intent that it would interconnect with the system that's been designed for the Mendocino City Community Services District. So they're, in the midst of a small expansion project to improve service to the high school. The intent of that of the grant-funded project that we've been working on for you is to expand that system and create a terminal storage reservoir at the tank site that could essentially backfeed the entire system with recycled water. So the plant would pump up and it would gravity feed down, and that would essentially replace all of your non-potable use. Yeah, including Friendship Park and the community center. Yeah.
Go forward, okay.
Back up a couple slides. This is fine. Okay, so here's kind of a preliminary concept plan of what our recommended improvements are. I'll just go over here. I'll keep this looking. So you have your
You may,
16 tanks here.
Trell, you're gonna, is that okay? Okay.
Okay. You have your existing treatment building here, and all three components here will be demolished. And then we'll construct a new, bigger tank. 200,000 gallons is the capacity we're looking at, based off the NFPA code. So it would have an adequate fire storage. Construct a new treatment building that's up to date with all the bells and whistles, and then fence enclosure around the whole site with also a newer access road. And this is kind of a, let's see, this is the blow up. This is a bigger view of the lot.
And well 3 isn't on that diagram.
Yes.
Yeah,
So-
the third well is actually kind of just outside the service area. It's kind of right down in this area here. So,
So you'd be changing where the location of the fence would be in relation?
we'll look at that. Yeah, we'll look at that. It may be possible to adequately protect the well itself in place, or maybe just put a small fence around it for security purposes without having to, extend the fence all the way around it.
Mhm.
Yeah. The site is kind of near, there's a little radio transmitter out there for I think the schools. Yeah, it's right in that vicinity. Yeah, and then, so the idea is the construction could be phased to maintain at least one tank online at a time, and providing space for a future recycled water tank.
Yeah. And again, this is preliminary, so we're still finalizing details, and we haven't actually got into the design yet, so this is more a concept phase. And Michael, as you mentioned, that third well wasn't on that last slide, and we already went over this, but these are potential locations for a new well. In all likelihood, that third well will be installed in the northeastern corner, but we're still doing our research and still finalizing our study.
The red circles kind of show the areas that we've honed in on as feasible well locations. But we really like the site up near the existing wells. There's a lot of water there, and it's evidence from the surface water. There's a lot of little small springs in the area. And then it's also close to all your existing facilities, so you wouldn't need to have, long runs of piping to maintain, and pumps with higher capacity to be able to pump all the way up there. So we think it's just a good fit.
Okay, cost for the proposed improvements. Let's see, you can see on the bottom, the rough estimate is around 3.5 million. And again, this is, we're gonna apply for a grant to get this fully funded. So that's one of the later phases of the project after we complete the design.
Yeah, and the cost estimate in this particular case is reflecting the cost for the cast-in-place concrete tank, which in the present value analysis that the state requires kind of wins out over the other material types when you're looking at it on the life of the asset, right? So the concrete tank lasts about 80 years. If we look at the other tank material, the other tank types over that time period, you're looking at a replacement kind of midway through at that 40-year mark.
I think that was one of the most impressive things I found in the study, is that the state basically is saying you have to look 80 years and add the cost of maintenance into a program. I mean, we're usually so short-sighted when we build things. You know, we try to get the cheapest thing that'll do the immediate thing and get it done. We don't think about whether if we, spend more money and did it better, it would last longer and there'd be overall a reduced cost. And
Lower
so
cost, yeah.
I
That's
think
the
that
value of the present worth
I
analysis.
think it was a brilliant,
And we're trying to change the state's approach on this. So in reality, the state looks at the present worth analysis over the financing period, which is 20 years, okay? And we don't believe that that's an adequate time period to evaluate these kinds of assets, right? Water tanks, pipes, fire hydrants, these things last for decades, for 50, 60 years, right? And when you're looking at an asset management plan, you need to look that far out, and you got to look at the life of the asset. So the 80-year analysis looks at that, and the intent is to do an apples-to-apples comparison amongst all the types. We also need to present to the state a life cycle analysis at 20 years because that's their financing period. We're attempting to make a strong case to the state finance department that the 80-year life cycle cost analysis is the appropriate analysis upon which the alternative should be based. I'm hopeful that they will accept the approach, but like I said, their analysis is for 20 years. What could happen, we don't know yet because the state hasn't made a decision. What could happen is we end up with a lesser tank, right? And we think that that would likely be the glass fused to steel tank, which is a fine tank. It has a longer life than the epoxy coated, bolted or welded steel tanks. Not quite as long as the concrete tanks. You would still be in a fine position, with your water system. But we're really pushing for the longer life, and we hope the state agrees.
and so the expectation is that when the state water board makes a determination about whether they accept this document to go forward, that goes hand in hand with the funding to do it. They're not gonna, on the one hand, approve a document that calls for $3.5 million worth of funding and then only supply $2 million in grant funding.
Right. So, well, the project, or the program that the state has, it's the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, is what funds these kinds of projects. It has a $5 million cap on a project, and that includes the funds for planning, for design, environmental, permitting, construction, so just the actual construction cost, and your construction management and construction administration. So our goal here is to craft a project that fits within that budget, but also gives you the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, and the longest life assets. So that's our goal. The $3.5 million project, it reflects the, the concrete tank. If we ended up with something less, or if the state doesn't agree with the life cycle cost analysis at an 80-year period, or, even at maybe a 60-year period, and we end up with something less, we'll just have to accept it because they would be the funders. You'll still end up with a great project and a long life out of those facilities, particularly if they're well maintained. Yeah.
Under contractor costs, I saw 30% for contingencies, $699,000.
Would you go back to the estimate?
What is that? That's kind of a big number for a contingency. I don't know what a contingency is.
Yeah. Let's get to that slide. We can walk through some of those numbers. One more. Here we go. All right. So, so the components are the first one: demolition of the site, preparation of the site, the fencing, the gates, the access road, any minimal drainage, and so we end up with a construction cost estimate at the bottom. We do include in there what are these contractor costs. So that's the general conditions, mobilization, demobilization, bonding. These are the costs to the contract. This includes their profit. Right, so these are the costs that they incur to mobilize out here, bring all their materials and equipment. The contingency number is a number that we include at this level of a project to provide us some estimating room, right? Because we're at a very conceptual level with the project. We haven't drilled down yet to the level of design and detail that will occur later on. So what this does is gives us a little bit of breathing room with the budget that we propose to the state to make sure that the project isn't underfunded.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I just thought it's a big number,
it-
700,000.
I agree. And what's important to keep in mind too these days is the economy in California is really hot right now, and construction costs are going through the roof. And we're trying to be really careful about how we estimate this project to make sure that when the school district goes out for bids, that you don't get bids that come in higher than your available funding. And one of the first projects I did in my career with our company was for the city of Rio Del, and we built 5 miles of pipeline and 2 new water tanks and a pump station. And we had to bid the project twice because the first time the bids came in higher than the state's allocated budget, and we actually had to take components out of the project. We proposed a glass fused to steel tank in that project, and we had to back it down to an epoxy-coated bolted steel tank, which is the cheaper option, in order to get everything to fit within the budget. So we're trying to be careful here to make sure that everything is going to fit and you get the best stuff. Yeah.
Is there any understanding of what would happen if, due to climate change, we had a much longer drought than we have ever had before? What would happen to that aquifer? Do we know?
Well, what was your experience with this last drought?
I'm not sure.
That was a record. I think the previous dry year record was in 1977, if I recall, and that has been the benchmark for water resources planning on the North Coast ever since, and up until I want to say it was 2015. I think you guys got through it, and I recall from speaking with Otto, the maintenance superintendent, that the aquifer definitely dropped down. I don't know, what the record keeping was in terms of how many pumps were burned out because they got sucked dry, but you could expect a significant reduction in the yield from your wells in a serious drought. And the trends are that we're going to start seeing more and more of those sorts of events moving ahead. Yeah. So again, it's another reason why we're being cautious with the recommendations and including that third well in there, is to give you one more straw, if you will, from which to pull water from your aquifer.
I have no basis for understanding a lot of this stuff, but is there a reason to consider pulling water out of the ocean for fighting fires?
Well, it certainly could be done. It's done in San Francisco. But they have a separate system for fire protection. I think it was probably after that 1906 earthquake that they put in a completely separate fire protection system that does draw on the seawater, and it's a pumped system, and it's a completely separately piped system from their potable system. I'd say nearly all coastal cities don't have a fire system. There would be it'd be a significant undertaking to obtain the permits to have an ocean intake. Those are really difficult to obtain these days. And then having a separately piped fire protection system would also be a serious undertaking. Our hope is that with your existing potable system, which has fire hydrants, and adding to it a recycled water system, also with fire hydrants, you'd see purple hydrants out there, or pink hydrants, I think purple hydrants. That would really help to increase your overall community available fire supply, right? Because that recycled water system would not just provide a non-potable offset, right, for irrigation or other potential beneficial uses, but it also supplements your already available supply of water for firefighting purposes. And that could be a significant component, based on what the treatment plant produces daily. Yeah, most of which is headed out to sea, right? So let's capture that and bring it back and use it for beneficial purposes. Any other questions on the costing? It looks like a lot of money, right? But our goal is ultimately to get this 100% grant funded by the state. So the school district would not incur any cost to the project.
Is there no needed redundancy for the tanks? I mean, we have two now and we're going to one.
With the one, so we're kind of looking at that idea. Having two tanks would give you the ability to take one offline if needed for maintenance purposes. That can be nice. It does add more cost to it. And we've talked with the state about that. We need to feel them out a little bit more on whether they would be willing to fund a project with two tanks. Yeah, it's not an open checkbook, so we do need to kind of be careful with how we craft the project so that they accept it. Yeah, but that was a good question. We've been thinking about that.
One of the things that isn't in your presentation, as far as I can tell, but is part of your report, is, the state requires you to ask if there are other agencies with which, in the long-term future, you think that there's beneficial room for cooperation. And you list a couple private water companies that provide water for subdivisions.
Yes.
And is that something that we should think about, or is that something that you have to put in there because the state requires it, but it's not really something that's going to be something's achievable in the 2-year time span that we're talking about for this?
Those are good questions. You want to take that? Yeah.
So you do have an adjacent water system. I believe it's called the Hills Ranch system for a little neighborhood. I think it serves 60 people or so. And so one thing we are looking at is connecting to that system so that we could provide additional capacity to both systems, and it would be mutually beneficial, increase fire storage and also water.
But to your question, yes, the state does require us and you to look at that as a long-term option. The state is very keen to see water system consolidation across California, and in particular in rural areas, because it does, as Trell noted, provide a backup or a redundancy, and it can also reduce operation and maintenance costs. And I know historically, I think the Hills Ranch did serve, kind of help meet, or maybe the school district helped meet their supply at one point. I know there was some mutual benefit there. The systems are very close to each other. At the fire station, there's two fire hydrants, that one on one, one on the other. So the ability to connect is very viable, and we think it is a mutually beneficial arrangement. We need to include that in the report. The state will likely want that interconnection to be part of the project. And for the reasons that we stated, it would not be a permit like an open valve, if you will, right? It would be a closed valve that's there for use in emergencies, right? So you're not having to lay hose between two fire hydrants. You just need to open up a valve, and one system could supply the other, or vice versa. Yeah. For the potable system, because there are two potable systems, right, that we're talking about. So it would be
You can't reverse back up. Can you reverse back up the hydrant system into the storage tank?
Well, so I think the Hills Ranch system is a little lower down in elevation than the school district. So in theory, the school district system could supply the Hills Ranch system entirely, but not the other way around. You would need to have a booster pump probably somewhere over where the fire station is that would pump up to supply K through 8 and fill a tank back up. But it could gravity feed back down to meet the needs of the high school and the community park. Yeah, that's right.
It's, one of the other factors that Charlie Acker, who was a former board member who's in the water business in Elk, pointed out to me was that we have very high water pressure here at the high school. It's 150 pounds per square inch.
Yeah.
Before it's, reduced. And locating a tank at a lower elevation like Hills Ranch or Grindle Park, which is right by the firehouse down there on Little Lake, would allow for a safer level of water pressure here at the high school.
Yeah. There's actually an easier way of managing that. And what could be done is to put in a pressure reducing valve in line on the main, and we have to look at the hydraulics of the system to select an appropriate location. And a pressure reducing valve, say once you got above 80 or 90 PSI, right, which is about the maximum pressure that you see in a typical municipal system, you would step the pressure back down to something, say around 60, and as it continues to gravity feed down toward the high school, you'd be at a more, adequate pressure, not blowing fixtures out and, having other issues related to high pressure. Yeah. So it's something that we're looking at and definitely would be worth considering in this project. I think we could talk a little bit more about that if there are needs down here, because most of this effort is focused up at the tank site and the well site, which is really the subject of the state's interest. Right. But if there's an opportunity to improve the system operations elsewhere, we could certainly include that in the project and run it by the state to see if they're in agreement. And, for a recycled water system, I think that's also an appropriate measure. Yeah, good.
So the timeline's exciting. Next slide, right?
Yeah, so you want to talk a little bit about the schedule, Trell?
Yeah, so we're close to wrapping up the basically the preliminary study, which is what we presented here to you, which included the concept plan and the estimate of the proposed system. We're also wrapping up the source water evaluation. Our hydrogeologist is close to completing his report, basically detailing the information needed to determine where the best location is for that third well. Following that, then we're going to actually get into the design. We're going to get into the details of, where exactly the tank is going to go, how the new treatment building is going to be constructed, and all the piping work that's going to be needed to connect to from the wells, the new well to the new treatment building, to the new tank, and then to the existing piping infrastructure. So that's the next phase of the project. And then following that, we get into the CEQA permitting, which is basically your environmental impacts. And then we get into trying to get the grant awarded for this project.
Yeah, so we're right up here at the water system plan, source water evaluation. You see those May 2019 dates. That's right where we're at right now. And we're right ready to start on design once we get the state's approval of the plan and of the alternative. So we're hoping to have that within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So we're maybe a month off this schedule right now, but still definitely within the timeframes that we've all been hoping we would be. The goal is to have the environmental and the permitting completed concurrent with design. Our expectation is that the environmental, which is the CEQA, that's the California Environmental Quality Act, that will be a low-level document. So at the most, it's what we call an initial study mitigated negative declaration. We're hoping it could be categorically exempt because really the project isn't building anything new. It's replacing existing infrastructure that you already have. And in CEQA, replacement falls under a negative declaration. So that's ultimately our goal. We're hoping the state will agree with that approach to the environmental. It reduces the level of effort and the cost associated with it. And then, following design, at that point, we submit a new application to the state requesting the construction funding for the project.
So before in a month, they'll give you a go-ahead in general terms, in terms of accepting the parameters that you've established.
Yeah, accepting the
type of
project.
tank,
That's right.
The type of, you're okaying your budget, and then you do the planning, and then they look at your specific plans and say, yes, that meets our expectation of what we were gonna get for this amount of money, and then they give you a final go-ahead.
Yeah, so during design, we'll have to submit the plans, the specifications, the estimate to the State Division of Drinking Water, the Department of Finance, to DSA, the Division of the State Architect, and we'll also be sending them to you and any other parties or stakeholders that the school district would like to have input or review. And we address the comments. We make sure that the project has been designed correctly and ready to go. And once the design is complete, we submit that with the construction grant application and request funding for construction. And then following approval of that, there's a new contract, a new agreement that the state enters into with the school district for construction. And at that point, the school district is able to advertise the project for bidding publicly for bids. And, it has to follow a public bidding process, which you probably have done that several times. I know with the K-8 school, you may have had to have done that. And then, the project moves forward with construction. So, our goal, I think ideally, we'd like to see a summer 2020 construction if we can get the stars to all align and if the state does things in a good time frame. Yeah.
Do we have any communication with residents if we're going to put in another well and possibly affect the draw, the water draw?
So our expectation is that your draw won't increase, but we're really just improving what's there. But yes, there would be a notification to area residents about the project.
And where in the time frame would we do that?
That would probably happen sometime near the end of design and prior to construction. So the notification usually is occurring prior to construction to let folks know that the school district has a project that's going to be happening and this is what it is. And that's part of the environmental process, the notification. Yeah. The CEQA process requires notification to the public of the project and what it entails.
So before we get too far along, we should at least let the public know that this is a process that we
Certainly.
should do.
Yeah, and we're happy to come back at any time, and if you wanted to have a public hearing, or an open house to discuss the project or present the project to the larger community or, to the school board or others, we're happy to do that, kind of like what we were doing here today, to keep everyone informed of where the process is and what the project is entailing and what the next steps are. Yeah. So we're kind of at a milestone right now, which is one of the reasons why we're here, and we're about to hopefully embark on the next phase of the process. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Do you know if you're gonna have to get approval from the Community Services District to dig a new well?
The approval for wells comes from the county. So this will be over in Ukiah. Actually, we'll have to submit a application for a well installation. Yeah, and is that all we had for slides? I think that's it. Yeah. So we've reached the end of our presentation to you this evening. I hope it was informative. In addition to what's in the report, we will be finalizing the report, like I said, in the next few weeks, and you'll get a new copy with a few revisions to it, addressing some of the comments that we received from the state. If you have any questions or comments about the report, please feel free to pass them on to us. We're happy to help answer them. If there's anything in the report that you feel may need to be revised in any way that we may have gotten wrong, please let us know. We want to make sure we get it right, because the state's intent is that this report is a roadmap for you moving forward. And I'll note too, the Division of Drinking Water Engineers, there's two in particular, Amy Little and Sherry, oh gosh, I can't remember her last name right now. Sherry Miller, thank you. They're both very happy and impressed with the report. It was more than they were hoping for. So we took that as a positive toward the project, and I think really the agency that we need to convince is the state finance department, right? They hold the purse string. They're the ones that are funding the project. Your state engineers, Amy and Sherry, are 100% behind this project. They feel like this is absolutely the right project for the school district and the community, and they're our advocate as well. So we're hoping that with their support, everything will go according to plan. Good. Thank you very much. We appreciate it again. Okay.
I'm going to go on to 8, just because of the time, if that looks correct. And so we have a parent and community comment. Does anybody have a comment? Okay.
I'll
so-
always go. I can give
This
you a
is your
Powerball
moment.
update for the high school renovations. Last night, the jackpot was $119 million. I had one number 66 for my son's football number here at Mendocino High, so I'm getting closer. We're going over the architectural design on the cocktail napkins from Patterson's Pub. I'm happy to say that after this Saturday, the jackpot's up to $136 million. I took the $83,600,000 cash option, and intend to be coming back and distributing millions to the school department after I win Saturday night. But there is one thing: we will not be having a 14-foot statue of athletic director Noah Gold. Despite no matter how many times he requests that, it will not be part of the project, and that's my update. Thank you.
Thank you. On to the consent agenda. Anyone make a motion to approve or?
I'll move that we
change?
approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're up to the student report.
So it's been a couple meetings since I've been here, but I'm here now. So recently, there has been, as you guys might know, probably know, last 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago we had our AE week, but I'm gonna let Tobin talk about that because he has a report scheduled for today. So all I'll say is that it went really well, and from what I hear, this was a very good AE week. A lot of the people who came back this year from their trips really seemed to like it, especially some new trips. So that seemed to have gone well. Other than that, so there's some stuff happening. Like today, we had an event called Got Consent, which is it's a group from Blue Door who comes and they do kind of like a mini campaign thing, and they invite people to come in and make T-shirts and talk to students about like consent and other such things. And so we've had that in the past, and it seemed to have gone well this year. A lot of people making shirts, a lot of people talking about it. Other things, so our high school prom is coming up next month on the 11th, so it's very close. Other than that, so with sports, a lot of our spring sports are coming to an end, so tennis is coming to an end, which is next week we have a tournament. Happy to say I'm on the team, and it seems like we're possibly going to go undefeated. We've beat Fort Bragg, who's our stiffest competition, and then we have 2 more games to play. And then with golf, the golf team seems like it was a success. They recently had a qualifier for a bigger tournament, and one of our students, Hardy Beak, qualified for the CMC golf tournament. So golf has been a success. It seems like the people on the team really like it. And then we also have just a school event, dodgeball event that's ending soon. We're having a tournament like the bracket right now. Alright, and then so academic stuff, we have all students have signed up for classes, and so that went smoothly. We also have an academic, like we have a presentation from this woman, Ruth Weiss. She's coming tomorrow to our school, and she's giving a presentation and show. She was a part of the beat poetry movement, and she's coming to our school tomorrow to give a show. And she's also she lived in Austria, and she during World War II, but she moved away before all that bad stuff. So she's coming to give a show and talk to us. Other than that, we recently, as you know, the school was looking for new teachers to fill the 2 science positions for teaching biology and physical sciences, and we recently had a committee put together of teachers and students, and I was on the committee. We have 2 candidates. One has accepted. The other one is still can't talk about it. It's still they have not accepted yet, but we have hired for the physics, chemistry, and earth science department. So we have that, and the other one is we're still talking to them. And yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you.
This is almost the best presentation of the year because just a bunch of pictures. But AE Week 2019 went off really well this year. I was lucky enough to be on the Yosemite trip with 2 of the students that are here. And I think we have the other 3 are engineers that are all on the engineering trip. But it was just amazing. We met with the staff yesterday, and everyone told their stories, and just the depth of experiences that the trips had was just really amazing. Everyone was just amazed about everyone else's trip. So go ahead. So we'll go through some of them and just share the pictures. So this is the yearly Ashland trip. They took in 3 plays and the sights of Ashland and ate good food. Celebration of Self was a local trip. You might recognize some of these locations. They did some outdoor activities and also some sort of personal reflection type activities. You can see the Bowling Ball Beach there is one of the locations. One of the neat things about some of the local trips is like none of the students had been there before. So it's like this amazing, well, geologic, but just cool place. And it's so fun to introduce students to things that are right in their backyard. So. Marshall's trip to La La Land. Amazing what he packed in to each of the days. Just the, from going to studios to film schools to the Getty Museum, college campuses. I think there's one more, go ahead. Another thing that was interesting this year, was that UCLA or USC? That was UCLA. And you guys got a tour of that, right? Yeah. In the middle, there's this non-disclosure agreement. The Marshall's trip, because they're going into film companies, they're seeing films and things that hadn't been released yet, so they had to sign these. And the engineering trip, where they were like in the Tesla factory, and I think maybe some other places where, you know, they had to sign these. So people got really deep into these industries and really got a good behind the scenes look. It was just really exciting. For some reason this year, it just seemed like more than other years. Some really, you know, like once in a lifetime type opportunities. Okay. There is the engineering extravaganza. I think that's the Tesla factory in the upper right and the Stanford Linear Particle Accelerator, right? So both those pictures are that's both Stanford, yeah. At Tesla. And where is this here? Is that's Stanford, yeah. So these all ended up being from Stanford. But they went to, what are some of the other places you guys went?
We went to Lockheed Martin. We went to Moffett Airfield. Lick Observatory in the hills.
Yeah.
That was really cool. I like that.
Yeah, and they got to see like in the basement where they coat the mirrors and polish the mirrors and all these. So again, a real behind the scene tour. Really cool. Go ahead. Another coastal one, the same thing, just, you know, students that you can see them paddleboarding. Noyo, like, had no idea that, you know, the river went farther up, and, you know, it's just amazing. Definitely cool. The Noyo Center did a wonderful presentation. This is either Montgomery Woods or Hendy Woods. I forget which one, but they had a ranger there. It was Hendy Woods, yeah. Go ahead. Creative writing. So a group of students stayed on campus and wrote stories for a week and had many local authors come in. In fact, Chris Calder was one of them who came in. But just so cool that students chose to do this, and they all produced short stories and at the end of it. First responders. You can see how much fun these guys were having. So Mr. Grimberg said that there's definitely some future firefighters in this crew. And, you know, on like all the trips, just the amount of effort that went in. I mean, they literally got to cut that car apart, just like, you know, the firefighters do. And you can see, I guess they're cleaning the school off with the hose there. And but again, just super amazing that these students got to experience this. I mean, they were doing what all the volunteer firefighters do. So go ahead. Oh, yeah, here's the same trip. See if you can recognize the guy on the right. Apparently his cat was in a tree, and they did a mock scenarios where there were people that had certain things that happened to them, and they had to go around and interview them and find out what was wrong, and they were being dispatched to different places, and it was the real deal. And then did some cleanup at the fire department too. So very cool. That's Otto, by the way. Go ahead. The Sierra Adventure, we had a few groups that ended up in the snow. Sierra Adventure, you know, so many Mendo students are, you know, they see snow and it's just like, you know, we experienced this on our trip. They can't not like make snowballs because it's so unique. But they had a couple days on the slopes and a couple days cooking and sort of preparing, doing things for the other students that were off playing in the snow. So it was sort of a dual trip in that regard. Go ahead. Woodworking here on campus. Everybody was able to complete a couple projects. You can see Adriana used the skill saw and cut this thing out here. I think there's one more thing, some little boxes, a handle on a machete, some wooden rings. So pretty neat that they got to do that in a week. Go ahead. Mountain biking. Again, another local trip. They also go up north as well and do a mountain biking course up north. But and they also worked on the community school bikes and got them in operating order. A lot of them were not functional. Oh yes, and this was our great trip to Yosemite. This is traditionally the freshman trip. I joined late in the game. They needed another chaperone. I'm super glad that I did. It was just a great experience. There we are under El Capitan, of course, with Half Dome. So we spent some time in the valley. We went to Merced Grove. We did hikes. We did some sort of team building activities. I think there's another one here. There's Merced Grove. We stay in this cabin. These guys built a little snow shelter. Just a wonderful trip. And, you know, the whole thing with AE Week, when you're going with groups and going to different places, everybody kind of shows up and they're all in their little separate cliques and they're hanging out with their friends. And, you know, the chaperones are kind of taking wagers like, how long will it take for the boys to go talk to the girls and for this, you know. And then by the end of the trip, everybody's just like one big family and they're playing games and having a good time. And, you know, it's just this magic that happens. It's like you can't stop it from happening. So it's one of the really great things about the trips that are, you know, with groups. Because you get students that they know each other, they've known each other most of their lives, but they don't know each other that well necessarily. So it can be a lot of fun. And then there's lots of thank yous. Go ahead, next slide. This is by no means an exhaustive list. This is basically who could get things to me by the end of today. But Muse and Site Council and the Children's Fund all provided money. We had a lot of individual people. Greg Braden donated all the wood for the wood shop projects. We had a couple alumni connections, one at Tesla, Andreas, and Saxino was down in LA. Mendocino Volunteer Fire Department, of course, you saw the pictures. I mean, that couldn't have happened without them. The film festival, Steve Reese, who's related to a family from here. And does Noah have any? Old friend of Marshall's, Legacy Effects. Some of the LA people that gave real personal tours to all the students. Lost Surf Shack, you saw all those stand-up paddle boards. Lost Surf Shack, Subsurface Progression. Casper Creek Campground, John Walsh, all helped out on that. Coastal Adventures. Kyla's mom, Alona, we had a little car issue, and she didn't wake up thinking she was going to Yosemite on Monday, but she did and saved the day. And the Graham Drake family loaned us a car on that trip too. So it's so cool how people just pitch in. Of course, Harvest Market always lets us set up tables out front. The Mac House did a dine out. Some parents went above and beyond and made jewelry for kids to sell. A lot of the trips went to local places like Fortunate Farms or Apple Farm, and you know, they gave us tours. Rolf Barnett helped with the celebration of self. Delphine Davidson, again, just volunteered her time. And Joe Stoffers, who's a local, he's a park guy that drives around with the surfboard on top, one of the two. was at the beach the day that Coastal Adventures was surfing and served as a lifeguard and just talked with the kids and surf with them. So that, like I say, that is not a complete list. That is what I could gather together today before the presentation. But I think you can see how much community effort goes into this, and of course all the teachers that plan and the students and parents that fundraise really make it a special thing. And I don't know, we had a great time in Yosemite, and I'm sure it sounds like a lot of trips had a great time. So, students have anything to add? All right. So super successful, and I didn't hear, you know, any negative things from any of the trip people. Everything was overcome and it went really smoothly. So, yeah. All right.
All right. So Susan, can you put up the facility use?
Sure.
So as we, later on in the agenda, we'll start the process for the Maintenance Assessment District, the MAD. This is a three-step process where we have to pass this resolution tonight to begin. This allows us to form a maintenance assessment district and to levy assessments to defray the cost of improvements. Really, this is really for the community and for their use of our facilities. So I thought this would be a good meeting for me to show you exactly how much our facilities get used on a regular basis. So I'll come back to that as soon as it's up. But in the meantime, the LCAP, the meetings that we are required to hold for the LCAP are well underway. I've already met with the high school site council, the K-8 site council, the K-8 staff, and there will be a soup with the soup. If any community members would like to come, this is a parent community meeting on May 6th, I believe, Monday, May 6th. I'll serve a batch of soup to entice people to come listen to the LCAP presentation. And then I meet with the high school staff next week. And then Jessica, as the board president, and I are part of a group called MECA here on the coast. It's you know what, I don't know what the A stands for, but it's the Mendocino Educational Coordinating Council. I want to say association, but that would be weird. But maybe it is. So it's MECA, but it's comprised of Mendocino Unified, Fort Bragg Unified, MCRPD, MCOE, Three Rivers Charter attends.
Mendocino College.
Mendocino College, yeah, that's a big one. Mendocino College.
Three Rivers.
And of course Three Rivers. And we get together once every 2 months and just discuss how things are going and how we can support each other. But recently we've kind of felt like we didn't have a focus and the attendance has been lower. So Jessica actually had the idea at the last meeting to create a focus more about employment and connecting employers with possible candidates, providing opportunities for resume help, interview skills, also connecting the college to potential candidates as well. And so we are having a job fair on May 10th at Mendo College, and we are doing this in association with the Chamber of Commerce, so that's exciting. So it's fun, it's very exciting to actually have a focus in these meetings. I'm not seeing that. You don't have it?
I don't, I'm so sorry.
All right. So there was a whole list of the programs that we have that we allow to use the school. It's really not worth talking about if you can't see it, but we have about 20 regular groups of whether it's individuals or groups or community groups that use the high school on a regular basis. About 10 at the K-8 school, 3 at Albion, 5 at Albion, 1 in Comsheen, 1 in Greenwood. And these aren't the one-timers. So our community really uses our facilities a lot for sports, for meetings, for rehearsals. The PAC is used all the time. So just another reason why this maintenance assessment district is a good thing. It helps maintain the facilities for our community use. Okay, that's all I had.
Okay, thank you.
It's probably under a file accidentally.
I'm really glad that Tobin talked a lot about AE Week because one of the things that teachers are spending or have spent a ton of time on are all those amazing experiences that they provide for students. Fundraising is a huge, huge issue, and teachers spend an inordinate amount of money doing bake sales or all of the other myriad of fundraising that they put in for that. So I just wanted to mention that. MTA would also like to thank Muse again for funding a lot of those AE Week trips. Right now at the K-8, teachers have gone on the Petaluma Dobie. There's an 8th grade trip coming up in May. And I think all of those trips are what makes our district really rich, but does take a lot of money and effort among, not obviously everybody, but a lot of effort on teachers. So that is kind of what we're spending a lot of time on, or the high school has, and we have, and the K-8 kind of is. Springtime kind of, teachers kind of see the end, and we're trying to keep all the kids kind of focused without looking at the calendar. The big goal is kind of containing, and you know, the high school's preparing for, they've signed up for classes, as Remy mentioned, and you know, some people are planning on college, and our kids are kind of matriculating, so it's kind of this big push to keep things kind of normal while also looking for the future. Thank you.
Trustee reports, start at the end.
I don't have any report.
I have a bit of an unusual report. A movie recommendation, possibly. I haven't seen the movie yet, and I'm recommending it. A couple months ago, I noticed in the pink section of the Chronicle, they have a list of the most popularly reviewed movies, the ones with the most positive reviews. It's like Rotten Tomatoes. And the movie at the top of the list was called A Bread Factory. And I looked on Netflix and it wasn't available. I went to the movie's website and there was a little thing you could click on to write to them. And I wrote and said, when's this going to be on Netflix? And the director wrote back to me and said that it was being shown in small communities around the United States and probably wouldn't be on Netflix for another year or something. And he'd let me know. And he wrote to me last week and said the movie would be at the Mendocino Film Festival. This movie's gotten 100% positive reviews. It's partly about a school board, and that's why I'm bringing it up. And it's partly about a school board in a similar community, I think, to ours. The school board has been funding this place that does art and theater for student access to those kinds of experiences after school. And they switched their funding to another organization, which reminded me of something. The movie is 4 hours long, and the people that reviewed it, this is the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, said if it was 6 or 8 hours long, they'd still watch it. So I just think, and the guy that, the director wrote back to me and said he'd be interested in talking to me because he hadn't asked any school board members what they thought of the movie. So part of it takes place at a school board meeting, and it will be at the film festival. I don't think you can get tickets yet, not for a couple more weeks, but.
What's it called again?
A Bread Factory. That's the name of the building that these art programs take place in. Apparently some Chinese company comes in from China or out of town and starts a competitive place, and the school board switches its allegiance to this other place. So that's my
That's so
report.
interesting, thank you.
I don't have anything.
Kathy?
I'll, on the MECA issue, just a little plug for the college. They really are interested in making sure that the programs they're offering at the campus here really supports the business community and job opportunities. And so they would like to have programs that support that, and they've been really open to getting suggestions of different types of classes that would interest the community. That's it.
And I'll be sending a press release to you guys to get out and get the word out for the job fair.
Okay. So we're on 9. Club Cardinal. Yay!
You too.
We're here.
Jason, thank you so much for having me here tonight to address the board. My name is Marianne Croninger, and I have been the president of Club Cardinal for the past 3 years. I'm joined tonight, but they won't come up with me. Will you guys at least stand? You too. By quite a few members of my board, and I would not be able to do this without their dedication and support, so thank you guys very, very much. Club Cardinal was started by a group of parents that wanted to streamline the fundraising efforts for the athletic programs at Mendocino High School. Being such a remote location, this organization wanted to take away some of the burden of fundraising from our students. With the amount of time that they spend on schoolwork, practice, and travel to games, it was hard for them to take the time to fundraise for equipment and uniforms. Our organization supports all sports, from cross country to swimming, and everything in between. Our community plays a critical role in our fundraising efforts. Our supporters are proudly displayed on the gym wall, and I encourage you to take notice, and next time you're in one of their establishments, please say thank you for their support. In the last 3 years, Club Cardinal has outfitted every single sports team on campus. Mendocino Unified School District contributes $300 per team, but in most cases, this is not enough to cover new equipment, tournament fees, and uniforms, so Club Cardinal picks up the shortfall. Areas that we do not cover are travel expenses and individual athletes. We are proud to say that in the past 3 years, Club Cardinal has contributed nearly $20,000 to the school. In addition to this, tonight I would like to announce that Club Cardinal has raised an additional $16,000 and will be purchasing new scoreboards for the Mendocino High School gym. We are very proud of that. But this isn't even our proudest accomplishment. Each year, we are honored to be able to give 2 scholarships to graduating student athletes. We've grown the scholarship program from $500 4 years ago, and this year we will be awarding $2,000 per student. So I'd like to thank you again for your time. We have a little pamphlet that we put together a couple years ago that also goes and talks about our organization. We have a Facebook page that shows about our athletes, and I'd like to ask if you have any questions. Thank you guys for your support.
All right, so that's there. So our facilities committee met multiple occasions looking at 7 RFQs for architects to work on our facilities assessment before we go out for a bond. And we narrowed it down to 3 finalists, QKA, Axia, and Alameda. Then we asked them some follow-up questions, we checked some references, and we would like to go ahead and recommend QKA for our architectural services. And I've given you the reasons, but their cost estimate was better than the competing firms of similar size. So they have already done a facilities assessment here at the high school, or it actually is a master plan. So they've already brought in the electrical engineer, the mechanical engineer, and did a systems analysis. So a lot of that work is already done, and I think that was one of the reasons why they were able to give us a better price than some of the other architects for this work.
What was their price?
It was about $34,000, $35,000. They have a great knowledge of our community. They have experience designing in a coastal environment. They have experience, or they know the requirements and the process of working with the Historical Review Board. Already have established a good rapport. They have experience working on projects this size. They have good experience working with or designing energy efficient buildings. They're positive references, and ever since they helped us with the K-8 school, they've been very responsive over the last 8 years to the questions we've had regarding that work, and whenever we've needed help, they've been very responsive. So, you guys want to add anything, or as far as from this facilities committee?
I think that pretty well sums it up. The thing that was most important to me, I've gone through certain thought processes about this, and at first I was focused on, we need to build buildings that need less maintenance, given the size of our plant, and that we've chosen to be a school district that has buildings in outlying sites and so on. And since then, I've sort of changed my thinking, and at this point, what's most important to me is that we build for energy efficiency. I don't think any of us, I'm speaking of everybody, myself included, has really absorbed climate change yet. I don't feel like we're dealing with it on the level we need to, and I think that our obligation to the students of this district is to construct buildings that are net zero energy buildings. I don't think we have any other choice. If you look at the children that are in kindergarten now and what they're going to be graduating into in 12 years, I just think it's super critical that they understand energy use in buildings. And looking at these different architects, QKA seemed to be the one with the most knowledge, the most LEED certified architects on their staff. Axia also has some experience with that, but not as much. QKA is building buildings that address this issue, and that was, for me, that was the most important factor.
I agree with Mark, and I think that bringing that to fruition is going to require our continued input. We're not going to be able to just pick any one of these and say, great, do it for us. We're going to have to make sure we get what we want, even if we don't quite know exactly what it is yet. We have some good ideas, and definitely the costs, their cost being competitive is huge. But the fact that, although prior to my time on this board, that this board has used them already and they served us well. Being in my line of work in construction, if you've got a contractor or subcontractor you work well with, just because there's another choice is not a good enough reason to switch. Stick with someone that you're happy with. So that was a significant layer to my supporting them.
One more comment I had is just having had experiences with QKA and with a very positive experience with Paul Douglas in Albion. I think that, of course, the architect is extremely important for many reasons, but I also think that this board needs to really pay attention when we deal with finding a project manager. That a lot of the criticisms I have of different building projects in this district rotate more around subcontractors and whether the person overseeing them is doing what we need them to do. And I think that's another critical thing that we need to pay attention to.
Well, thank you for that work, research. Any thoughts from the two? Yep.
You know, Jason and I had a meeting with Annie Liner and Ted Williams. Annie, of course, being the head of the Children's Fund, and Ted, our new supervisor. And both of them, in their own way, shocked me because their vision of a new high school was so non-traditional, in the sense that Ted, for example, was saying the only way you can build is concrete. You know, because you know, in an era of fire danger, there's no other material that you're going to get the bang for the buck for that is going to make sense. If you're talking, you know, and it was just, you know, I sat there, Jason will know, and my jaw was dropping because, I mean, it's sort of like, how's that ever going to get by the Historical Review Board? and you know, the reality is that I think that, you know, we really have to get a lot of community input in terms of what that vision is. And maybe we'll reach a consensus that is so powerful that the Historical Review Board can't say no. And that we really need to think about planning those kinds of meetings to get that kind of involvement, to get that consensus, so that when we go to an election, you know, that we'll get support. And I think, you know, we are managing it well. I mean, I think we've done these various steps in terms of hiring a bond consultant, hiring now an architect to do a facilities assessment. But as you were saying, both of you, that we need to be sure that we don't just assume that because we made those decisions that our job is ended, because it's just begun.
Can I ask something about, I thought I heard somewhere that the high school was exempt from the Mendocino Historical Review Board.
You get if you talk to two different people, you get two different answers,
Right.
So I think both Ted and Annie thought that it was, but Mark, who obviously, Mark Katroki, head of QKA, thinks that it is subject to it, and we've certainly brought projects before them, in the past, and I'm not sure it's a battle that, you want to fight in court, when the real issue is if we can get support for what we as a community decide we want, that makes more sense.
Right, well, I understand that, but I know over the years, now, I'm talking 10, 15
Yeah.
years ago, I remember hearing that the school board really didn't need their blessing because they were exempt from Historical Review Board.
I've heard that myself.
Okay, thank you, I just don't know as long as
Do you have any thoughts?
Nothing additional.
Okay, well, we have had some wear issues that were unexpected at the K-8 campus, and I'm feeling good that first of all, they responded so well to the issues we had at that campus, and I think they are now in a position to even have greater knowledge of what to do, at this campus, so I think they're a wonderful choice. So this is an action item. Would anyone like to make a motion?
All in the motion that we approve, whichever item it is.
9.3.
9.3, thank you.
I'll second.
The motion is to approve QKA
Correct.
as the.
Yes, to take the recommendation as written.
And Mark, your second?
Mm-hmm.
Any other further discussion? Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And your 9.1?
All right, so this is for the Maintenance Assessment District, the MAD. This is a three-part series, and this is for the first step, the first resolution is kind of ordering the engineer to prepare an engineer's report in accordance with this resolution, and it's the first step in obtaining these funds. And I give a little bit of a history. In 16, 17, we received 88,000, 17, 18, 89,000, and we budgeted to receive 89,000 again. So it's very valuable to our district, and once again, it keeps our facilities. It's the maintenance issue. It keeps our facilities up and running and for facility use for our community.
I move that we adopt resolution 2019-01.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, so this next resolution, it authorizes the refinancing of our bond. So I'm gonna read a statement from our bond, or financial advisor. In 2007, Mendocino USD sold a bond to make improvements to its facilities. Because of the passage of time and being a low interest rate environment, the district has the ability to refinance its outstanding bonds and save the taxpayers, but more so, the entire tax base money. The district's financing team submitted an RFP to lenders to try to achieve the lowest interest rate possible. 4 banks responded with interest rates ranging from 2.20% to 2.64%. City National was chosen because of the low interest rate as well as no other strings attached. So by approving the resolution tonight, we will save the taxpayers in our district approximately $215,000 over the next 4 years. The term of the bond does not change at all, and the district is only swapping out old high rates for low rates. So while this may not mean a lot to the average individual, having the opportunity to save our community over $200,000 is something that we would like to do, and I believe that we should do.
Excellent. Any motions?
What's the current rate?
They're over 5%.
Over 5%? Whoa, okay.
A motion that we approve yes, 9.5 resolution 2019-02.
I'll second that.
In the discussion, I was trying to make sense of this one attachment. The numbers, I don't quite understand. Maybe is it, down at the bottom, where is it attached? I don't know, sorry. 9.6, 9.5. Maybe some, I don't know if I go to you, all of these. I lost it. There was a breakdown of 3 different figures, a disclosure statement?
This one?
Yeah, what do they, I don't quite understand what's going on there. They don't add up, we pay, we get.
Well, I think it's not always apples and apples and oranges and oranges.
Okay. Because I couldn't come up with the 200,000 that we're
No.
saving there anywhere.
Because it's not in relation to that. What this is saying is that after we do this,
Yeah.
the bonds will be valued, the debt is $6,980,000. But when interest is added, over the period of time that they're paid off, the total payment is $97,430,000. That doesn't compare it to what it is
This is
now.
all the new.
That's all the new.
Okay,
It doesn't compare it to what exists at the moment.
okay, thank you.
This is what we're talking about.
Right. And the other part of that disclosure statement is that out of the proceeds of the refunding, the people who are doing this, the banks, the various intermediaries, they're gonna be making $90,000.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have to take the vote.
Yes.
Okay, all right, so, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so the next item is an amendment to the Community Center of Mendocino lease. I met with Callie Dim, who is now the president of the board there, and she has agreed that they are really in no way able to maintain Friendship Park, really the way it should be maintained. And so our maintenance department has been maintaining the field, but what I have proposed along with our facilities committee for the last few years is to kind of take Friendship Park back in control of the district. So we would be able to keep the weeds out of the infield, keep the park area clean and weeds under control, kind of divide that lease right down the middle. So we'll take all of the park back. So the only change to the lease is in the highlighted section there. I didn't see any other reference to Friendship Park in the lease. So that would be the amendment to the lease. But then, in addition, I thought this would be also a good time to talk about our program. Susan, can you bring up the scholarships in lieu of rent? So we, a couple of years ago, last year actually, we started a new program with them. They were not able to pay the rent to us for $1,200 a month. So what we proposed was instead of charging them rent, we would offer scholarships to students, families in our community. So 1,200 times 12 is 14,400. So go down a little more. Do see the math there. So it's 14,400. Mendocino Coast Children's Fund threw in another $5,600, so that was $20,000 of scholarship funds that was available last year and this year to our families. And so 29 families have been served this year. Now you can go up a little bit. So there's 5 sessions. Oh, this was last year. Sorry, this was last year. So last year we had $15,000 worth of scholarships provided to 29 families in our community to access the after-school program, and keep going down for how we are doing this year. So we had 4,486 left over. So instead of charging them that money, we offered to put that back into the scholarship program, knowing that Homework Club was being discontinued and that families might need more scholarships. So where we are this year, go down a little more and you can see the total. So we have served 26 families, and so far we've offered $12,443 worth of scholarships. So this is not money exchanging hands. This is scholarships in lieu of rent. And then on the left, the Coast Children's Fund, a huge plug to what the Mendocino Coast Children's Fund does for our community. That's actual money that they are giving to families for accessing the after-school program. So I think the idea to come up with this was a great one. Jessica, that was your idea, and it's offered so many opportunities to families in need in our district. So anyway, we would need to approve that amended lease if we wanted to take back Friendship Park. And we've also offered that to CCM that they can continue to hold their circus there, the Flynn Creek Circus, for free. So it's really a win-win. We can maintain that park the way it should be. And it's beautiful today. If you drove by on the way, it's beautiful. It's freshly mowed, and Little League's using it. It looks great.
I'll move that we approve the amended lease.
I'll second.
In your list of facility use, am I reading this wrong? Does this not include the downtown?
Yeah, it does not.
Because really that's our facility,
Yeah.
and it seems like it ought to be on the list. It's a little different arrangement, but.
What we just do is lease it to CCM, so that would just cover everything, and then what they do is up to them.
Right.
So yeah, you're right, I didn't include it. But I could get a list of who they rent it to. That would be interesting. We gotta work on that.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, class size limit.
All right, so the class size limits has to do with the inter-district and district of choice class size limits that we have. This is kind of a moot point because of the new MOU with Fort Bragg Unified. We're limiting our students to 50 transfers. So they are not going to be accepting transfers for new students coming into Mendocino from Fort Bragg until we get that number under 50. And currently we're at 78. And so we have to, so 28 students either have to graduate or move out of the area who are part of the program. But to Fort Bragg's credit, they've been working with us for students who have recently moved to Fort Bragg, who have been attending our schools for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. So that's why the number, it used to be 75, and now we're up to 78 students. So the number actually continues to grow because they've been willing to say, hey, we don't want these students to switch schools when they're in their high school years or middle school years. So this has to do with class size that allows us to, this puts a cap on whether or not we can accept new students. So currently we're at 20 for grades K through 3, 24 in grades 4 through 5, 25 in grades 6 through 8, and 28 students in the high school. One small recommendation, I guess, is that I would like to recommend moving our grade 4 and 5 class size limit to 22. So our classrooms are full at 24, and since we are continuing to do the multi-age classroom, the multi-grade classroom, I think that having a lower number makes sense. But like I said, it's really, I guess once this MOU, once we get under 50, that's when this comes back into play, but I think.
Well, doesn't it also come into play if somebody in an outlying school wants to transfer in?
That's a good point. For grades 4 and 5 they wouldn't, but for grades K through 3 they would. You're right. For intra-district transfers. You're
In
right.
the Point Arena.
And Point Arena, yeah. Right. And Anderson Valley. So yeah, I guess it does. Yeah, I guess it does in play.
So would you like us to make a motion as amended with the 22 for those grades?
Yeah, for 22. I don't know if there is a actual recommendation or it's just currently that. So I'd just like to recommend that we lower that to 22
Okay.
for grades 4 or 5.
Anyone like to make a motion?
I'll move to approve paragraph 9.7 with the change of the 22 for class years 4 and 5.
That's for, is it 4 or 5? Is that what you did?
Yeah, grades 4.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
I should have asked if there's a comment from MTA. It's okay.
We like small classes.
Okay.
The
Let's see,
smaller
do you want
the better.
small classes?
I haven't said that very often.
Okay, 9.8.
Alright, so 9.8 is the first reading, again, for the high school graduation requirements. I think this is the last time you're gonna see this one. Then it'll go to final. The only change is under the community high school graduation requirements on page 4. It's now science and CTE, 30 credits, that's the only change from the last time you saw it.
So it'll be on the consent next time around?
I know I sent to you and Tobin something I read that the California State University system is contemplating requiring 4 years of math for new students. And it wouldn't take effect for a few years, but it's something that if they do that, that's something that we should, be sure that we're prepared to match. And that's a major place that our students matriculate.
A motion?
I'll move to approve the first reading of Board Policy 6146.1 and its accompanying administrative regulation.
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Alright, so for information only, our sexual harassment, personnel sexual harassment policy in AR hasn't been updated since 2007 for the board policy, so this now includes gender identity, gender expression, and certain training requirements that we have to follow through on. So that's very important that we change that policy, and we are putting that in place. Similar to the AR, it really has to do with training, and how much training supervisors receive and how much training every single employee receives.
I mean, hasn't the new law basically said that employees have to be given, at least 2 hours of training every other year?
I think it's 2 hours for supervisors every other year, and then employees have to have one hour every other year.
Just 1 hour?
Yeah.
I know that there's also, starting in January 1st of 2020, that training requirement applies to temporary and part-time employees as well. Before they have finished their first 100 hours. So I'll probably have to bring this back again to reflect that.
So substitutes and
Substitutes and
I guess temporary employees
Right.
they would be subs. Is that right, Susan? 1 hour? It's 1 hour every other year, or is it 1 hour every year?
Every year.
So 1 hour every year for everyone, but then supervisors, it's 2 hours.
Every 2 years, I think.
Okay.
And where is training written into the curriculum for students, and if so, where?
Well, this just has to do with this
Right.
is personnel,
No, this is
Should
separate.
bring that back and look at those.
for a student,
Yeah.
yeah. I can find out for you where that is. Or the health classes cover that. My guess is in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade.
Good question.
future agenda items?
I mentioned to Jason when we talked about putting the bond on our agenda, just revolving every month to encourage any member of the community that wants to speak, and that way we can respond and speak with them rather than just for comment. I think sort of following up on what Mark was saying, and I think all of our sentiment to be as transparent as possible and get as much input as possible. Encourage earlier than later, hear from people who have opinions on the matter.
Great.
The other thing to comment on is that we canceled the board session meeting that was scheduled for May 8th. It's listed on the agenda here.
Well, thank you, everybody. That was nice of you to mention that.
Hey, Jim.